Welcome to Faith is the Podcast.
Mhm.
The show where we explore all things faith and try to, help you grow closer to God and all that good stuff.
Absolutely.
Today, we're going to be looking at this really popular YouTube video I found called Spiritual Journey.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that one.
Yeah. And it's all about, kind of like decluttering your spiritual life.
Yeah, like spring cleaning for the soul.
Exactly.
Yeah. So this video talks about 6 habits to quit to hear God's voice more clearly.
Okay, so the first one is letting go of distractions,
Mm-hmm.
which is tough, right?
Mm.
I mean, we're bombarded with information all the time.
Oh, yeah, totally. I mean, between all the social media and the news and everything, it's like there's always something vying for our attention.
Right, and the video actually talks about how that constant influx of information, it can actually kind of drown out the voice of God.
Exactly.
Like it's hard to hear that still small voice when there's all this noise going on around us.
Yeah, it's like trying to have a conversation with somebody at a rock concert.
Right.
You just can't hear anything.
So their point is to be more mindful of what you're letting into your mind and your heart.
Yeah, like choosing uplifting content.
Yeah.
Like, instead of watching, hours and hours of TV, maybe listen to a podcast or something.
Right, like this one.
Yeah, exactly. Or, read something that feeds your soul.
Right, and the second habit they talk about is releasing negative influences.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like this one's a bit more challenging.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, it's hard to hear God when you're surrounded by negativity.
Right.
Whether it's like critical people or, just a generally negative environment, it can really weigh you down.
And they also talked about how it's not just about the people around us,
Right.
but also the negative self-talk that we often engage in.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So it's like we have to protect our hearts from both external and internal negativity.
Totally.
And actually, the person in the video, they shared a personal story about how they were convicted by the Holy Spirit to shift from a critical mindset to one of love and encouragement.
Oh, wow, that's powerful.
Yeah, it really is.
And it's so true. Like, we often speak so much more harshly to ourselves than we would ever speak to anyone else.
Yeah, definitely.
And that negativity can really hinder our spiritual growth.
Oh, for sure. And it ties in with the third habit they mentioned, which is stopping criticism and judgment.
Oh, yeah.
Now, when I first saw that one, I thought, oh, well, that's just about judging other people.
Right.
But actually about judging ourselves, too.
Yeah, it's about both.
Like that inner critic that's always putting us down.
Yeah, and the video makes the point that when we're constantly judging ourselves and others, it creates a barrier between us and God.
Yeah, it's like we're putting up walls instead of building bridges.
Exactly. And, we have to remember that God sees our hearts
Mm-hmm.
and he loves us unconditionally.
Before we move on to the other habits,
Yeah.
I just want to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Business Refer.
Oh, yeah, they're great.
If you're a local business owner looking to connect with your target audience,
Mhm.
I highly recommend reaching out to them.
Yeah, they can really help you grow your business.
You can find them at info@businessrefer.com.
All right, now back to those habits. So the fourth one is shifting our focus from problems to God.
Okay, this one really resonated with me.
Oh, yeah, me too.
It's so easy to get caught up in, all the things that are wrong in the world.
Right. Or even just in our own lives.
Yeah, and I loved how the video phrased it.
How'd they put it?
They said, what are you doing with the things you can control?
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, it really makes you think, are we
Mhm.
choosing to magnify our problems
Right.
or are we choosing to magnify God?
That's a powerful choice.
It is. And it's not about ignoring our problems.
Right. Of course not.
It's about approaching them with a different mindset.
Yeah, like with faith and trust.
Exactly. Knowing that God is with us
Mm-hmm.
and that he's working everything together for good.
And the fifth habit is overcoming busyness.
Oh, man. That's a tough one.
Isn't it, though?
It feels like we're all so busy all the time.
Constantly on the go.
Yeah. And sometimes it feels like our spiritual lives get squeezed out in the process.
I know what you mean.
And it's interesting. The speaker in the video actually admitted to experiencing burnout from being too involved in church activities.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
So even good busyness can be a problem.
exactly. It's all about balance, right?
Yeah, and the video really emphasized the importance of prioritizing time with God.
Yeah, making it a non-negotiable.
They said something like, time with God isn't a chore, it's the source of our strength and guidance.
It's like we have to make time for what matters most.
Absolutely. And that might mean saying no to some things.
Yeah, like they asked, what can you cut out to create space for what matters most?
That's a great question.
And that's a great place to pause for now.
Yeah, we'll pick up with the last habit in the next part.
Sounds good.
Okay, so, we were talking about overcoming busyness, right? And the last habit that they talked about in the video was stopping people pleasing.
Yeah, and it's interesting how they kind of connected those two,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like sometimes our desire to please other people can actually lead us to overcommit, and then, we end up neglecting our relationship with God.
Right. It's like we're so busy trying to make everyone else happy that we forget about what truly matters.
Exactly. And it made me think about, why do we say yes to things in the first place? Is it because we genuinely want to help? Or is it because we're afraid of what people will think if we say no?
That's a good question to ask ourselves. And the video talked about how, living for God, it's not always going to be easy.
Right. There's going to be resistance.
Yeah, and sometimes even criticism from people who don't understand.
And I think that's where the courage comes in.
Yeah.
The courage to stand firm in our convictions,
Exactly.
even when it's unpopular.
And remembering that God's plan for us is bigger than any human opinion.
So true.
And it's interesting how they tied that into the whole idea of overthinking.
Oh, yeah.
Like sometimes that fear of what other people will think can actually fuel our overthinking.
And make us doubt God's guidance.
Absolutely. It's like we get so caught up in analyzing every possible outcome that we miss the simplicity of just trusting God and taking that leap of faith.
And the person in the video, they shared a story about how they were called to teach, but they were so full of doubts.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. They were like, am I good enough? Do I have the right words? What if people don't like it?
I think we've all been there.
Right.
It's so normal to doubt ourselves sometimes.
But what's inspiring is that they pushed past that fear.
Yeah.
And they embraced the calling.
Trusting that God would equip them.
Exactly. And it makes you think, what if they had let their overthinking paralyze them?
Mm-hmm.
They would have missed out on that amazing opportunity.
So true.
And it all comes back to this idea of subtraction.
Yeah. Letting go.
Letting go of the distractions, the negativity, the need to please everyone, even our own overthinking.
And in the process, creating space for God's voice.
It's like clearing the static on a radio.
So that the message can come through loud and clear.
And what I love about this whole concept is that it shifts the focus from striving and effort to surrender and trust.
It really does.
It's about recognizing that we don't have to have it all figured out.
Right.
We just need to be open to God's leading.
And willing to take those steps of faith.
Even when we feel uncertain.
It's a journey of letting go and allowing God to work in and through us.
And as we do that, we discover a deeper level of peace.
And purpose.
And fulfillment.
As I was thinking about all these habits, I realized something. They all point back to one central theme.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Trusting in God. Tell me more. Well, think about it. When we let go of distractions, we're choosing to trust that God's voice is more important than the noise of the world.
Mm-hmm.
When we release negative influences, we're trusting that God's love is stronger than any negativity we might encounter.
Okay, I see that.
When we stop criticizing and judging, we're trusting in God's grace and mercy.
Right.
When we shift our focus from problems to God, we're trusting in His power and provision. When we overcome busyness and people-pleasing, we're trusting that God's plan for us is more fulfilling than anything we could achieve on our own.
Mm-hmm.
And when we let go of overthinking, we're surrendering to God's wisdom and guidance.
Wow. You've basically woven all these habits into a tapestry of trust.
It's like each habit is a thread.
That when woven together, creates this beautiful picture of what it means to live a life of faith.
Exactly. And the amazing thing is that this trust, it's not something we have to muster up on our own.
Right.
It's a gift from God available to all who seek Him.
With open hearts.
And as we cultivate these habits, we create space for that trust to grow.
Leading us into a deeper relationship with Him.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation.
I know, right? It feels like we've only scratched the surface.
But I feel so inspired.
Me too. To really put these habits into practice.
It's a continual journey.
But the rewards are so worth it.
As we create that space for God,
we open ourselves up to His transformation.
And experience the fullness of life that He has for us.
And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into this amazing YouTube video by Spiritual Journey.
It was so good.
So much to think about.
And a huge thank you to Business Referred for sponsoring this episode.
If you're a local business owner looking to reach your ideal customers, definitely check them out.
They can really help you grow your business.
You can find them at info@businessreferred.com.
And to all our listeners,
thank you for joining us on Faith is the Podcast.
We hope this episode has encouraged you to examine your own spiritual habits.
And to take those steps of faith.
To declutter and make space for God's voice.
Remember, you're not alone on this journey. It's amazing how these habits all seem to be connected, Like they kind of build on each other, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Like when you start letting go of those distractions, it's almost like it makes it easier to deal with the negative people in your life.
Totally. And then as you get rid of that negative energy, you're not as critical and judgmental of yourself and others.
It's like a ripple effect, you
Yeah.
know? It spreads outwards.
I love that.
Yeah,
And I think it shows that we don't have to change everything overnight, you know?
definitely. Not at all. It's all about taking small steps and making gradual changes.
Progress over perfection.
Exactly. And every little step you take brings you closer to that place where you can really hear God speaking to you.
That's so powerful.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of hearing God's voice, one thing I think a lot of people struggle with is knowing the difference between their own thoughts and feelings and the actual promptings of the Holy Spirit.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It can be tough to tell them apart sometimes.
Right. Like, how do you know if it's God speaking or just, your own desires or fears?
Well, the video actually had a really helpful analogy.
Oh, what was that?
They compared it to tuning a radio.
Okay.
Like sometimes we're so caught up in the static of our own thoughts and emotions that we can't hear the subtle frequency of God's voice.
That makes sense.
But as we cultivate these habits, it's like we're refining our spiritual antenna.
We're becoming more sensitive to his whispers.
Mm.
I love that. And, it's interesting. The video also talked about how challenging it can be to live out these habits in a world that often promotes the opposite.
Right. Like busyness is often seen as a good thing.
Yeah, like a badge of honor almost.
And people-pleasing is often mistaken for kindness.
And overthinking can feel like being responsible.
Exactly.
So it can feel like you're going against the current sometimes.
Definitely.
But the video really reminded us that true fulfillment comes from aligning our lives with God's purpose, not the world's expectations.
And that all comes down to a fundamental choice.
What's that?
Who are we going to listen to? The voices of the world or the voice of God?
And when we choose to practice these habits, we're essentially saying that we're following God's lead.
Even when it's hard.
And the video talked about how that choice actually leads to freedom.
Freedom from what?
Freedom from trying to meet everyone else's expectations. Freedom from overthinking everything.
And freedom to embrace the path God has for us.
It's like we're finally able to breathe.
And to live the life we are meant to live.
Well, this has been an incredibly insightful conversation.
I agree.
We've covered so much ground.
And I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
But if there's one key takeaway I hope our listeners get from this episode, it's that making space for God isn't about adding more to our already busy lives.
It's about subtracting.
Letting go of the things that are holding us back.
So that we can experience the fullness of his presence.
Beautifully said. And as we create that space,
We open ourselves up to his love, his grace, and his guidance.
it's a journey worth taking, and I encourage all of our listeners to embrace it with open hearts.
And a willingness to trust God's plan.
Thank you for listening to Faith is the Podcast. We hope this episode has encouraged you on your journey. And a huge thank you to Business Referred for supporting us. If you're a local business looking to connect with your target audience, you can find them at info@businessreferred.com.